In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the rear brakes on this Ford F-150. Located right behind your rear wheels, let's get started. With the vehicle safely raised and supported, use a 21mm socket, remove all 6 lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. With a collection bucket underneath, I like to start by removing the bleeder screw cap, cracking this open, and squeezing the piston in as much as I can with a pry bar or screwdriver right through this opening. This will do 2 things. One, it'll allow me to remove the caliper easier because there's no pressure on the brake pads anymore. And 2, it'll confirm that neither the piston or the slider pins are seized if this can compress. Use an 11mm wrench, break it free. Have a collection bucket ready to catch the fluid that's dripping out of here. Stick a screwdriver or pry bar and very gently and slowly compress this piston. This actually went back completely, all the way, which is great. So now I'm going to give this a second. That way any air that may have gotten in there can come out, and as soon as we have a clean, steady trickle of brake fluid with no air bubbles, which is pretty much right now, I can close this off. Use that 11mm wrench, bottom it out, and just snug it a little bit, at most 1/8 of a turn. Use brake parts cleaner to remove any brake fluid that may have dripped down on the caliper. Once this is dried off, cap it back off so it doesn't get clogged up. Use a 13mm socket and loosen up and remove both of these bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. If the slider pin starts spinning, grab onto it with some pliers to hold it and prevent it from spinning so you can finish removing your bolt. I'm going to leave this one in a few threads so it can hold the caliper on while I remove the lower one. Take this bolt out, finish removing the top bolt. Now you can pull the caliper right off. We're going to flip it over and inspect it really quick. If you see that it's wet right around the piston, that means you have a brake fluid leak right here and it would need to be replaced. Also, if the piston didn't want to press in, that caliper is seized and would also need to be replaced. At this point, I'm going to set this aside up on the leaf spring. I don't want to pull on this brake hose by letting it hang, so right there it'll be nice and secure and out of my way. Remove the brake pads. Set those aside. Now use an 18mm socket, remove these 2 bolts holding the caliper bracket onto the rear axle. Leave this one in a few threads so it can hold it on while you remove the lower one. Take out the other bolt, finish removing the first one, and remove the caliper bracket. We'll set it aside on a workbench for cleaning. At this point, the rotor should slide right off unless it's seized to the axle, which in my case it is. I know it's not the parking brake shoes that are holding it because it can spin very freely. So I'm going to take a hammer from the back side and hammer it off, but before I do that, I will put a lug nut back on just in case it breaks free and wants to slide off of here, which is very unlikely, but I'm going to put it on just as a safety measure, so now I can hammer it from the back side. It broke free, so I'm going to remove my lug nut, wiggle the rotor, and there it is. Now you're going to want to clean the surface of this axle with a fine sanding disc or just a wire wheel if that's what you have. But whatever you use, you want to make sure it's flat without removing material. You just want to remove the rust and the debris so the new rotor can sit nice and flush. Once it's all cleaned up, use brake parts cleaner to rinse everything down. And with that rinsed off and dried up, apply a thin coating of anti-seize all around the surface of the hub of the axle where you cleaned up. That way, not only will it not corrode in the future, but the rotor won't seize on. Now you don't want a lot, because if you put too much, what happens is when you put the rotor on and you torque down the wheel, it'll actually squish this anti-seize out, and it can get on the surface of the inside of the rotor where the parking brake shoes go. And if that happens, your parking brake shoes won't hold anymore. So you want to make sure that you just coat it enough to prevent corrosion, but not enough for it to get everywhere. Now you want to take the new rotor, and I like to put it on backwards to start. This makes it a whole lot easier to clean the rotor off before installation because it's held on here and you can spin it around. So take some brake parts cleaner and rinse off the braking surface as well as the parking brake shoe surface. Once this has dried up, take it, flip it around the right way, and slide it all the way on. Now rinse the outside of the brake rotor. And now you want to check for the parking brake shoes adjustment. Mine was perfectly adjusted, so I expect it to stay the same. That's perfect right there. I can just barely hear them touch at times. You don't want these to have any drag, and you don't want them to never touch. So this is perfect right here. I'm going to leave it as is. However, if you were to adjust it, you could adjust it from the back side. There's a rubber plug that you can pull out, or you can take the rotor off, and right at the bottom, there's going to be an adjuster wheel that you can spin, and that will allow you to either expand or bring the shoes back in as needed. With our caliper bracket on the workbench, what we want to do is with a small screwdriver remove the old anti-rattle clips. Sometimes these are quite stuck here. Well, it looks like I didn't need one after all. And now you want to take a wire brush and clean this area. If this is rusted and swollen, what it does is when you put the new anti-rattle clip on, it'll push it up, and therefore the pads can't slide smoothly. Now you don't want to remove too much material by sanding it down completely, but you do want to clean off all the rust and debris. All right, this is as good as it's going to get for me. I'm going to rinse it down with brake parts cleaner. And once it dries, I'm going to apply some silicone paste that is rated for brakes. You can use brake grease if that's what you have, but whatever you use, make sure it's not going to melt with the high temperatures of the brakes. Otherwise, it will get onto your rotor or your pads or both, and neither would be good. You just want to put a thin layer on because too much will cause it to squish out when we put the new anti-rattle clip on. Now you want to take the anti-rattle clip and you'll see that it has two tabs that stick out. Those need to face the outside of the bracket, not the inside. Center it up and just press it down into place. There we go. Once you've inspected that this is fully seated, do the same to the other side. Once you've done the same to the other side, let's remove the slider pins one at a time. These are actually different between the two, and I'll show you exactly why. This rubber boot or the sleeve is only on one of them. The other one is not going to have this, so you want to make sure that they go back in exactly where they came from. I wiped the old grease off of this one and I'm inspecting it. This looks like it's in great shape. If yours was rusted or pitted severely, you're going to want to replace it. This one just needed a cleaning and it will be ready to go. I'm not worried about the grease that's in here because it was still very good grease, so I'm just going to add to it. If you wanted to clean the boot, you could just remove it, stick your rag through it. Once you take it out the other side, just squeeze the boot as you pull the rag through, and that's going to wipe off any grease that is remaining inside of the boot. Now this is cleaned up. There's still grease right up here. If there wasn't, I would put some, but there is, so I'm going to leave it. I'm going to take some grease, or silicone paste in my case, from my brush and add it to the inside of the boot. And then I'm going to lubricate the entire slider pin with a layer of my silicone paste. I'm going to make sure it gets right up here on the edge. Then slide the pin all the way in. Sometimes there's air that gets trapped in here. It looks like for me, the air just came right out, which is great. Now do the same to the other slider pin, and keep in mind the other slider pin will not have that rubber boot. Now take your caliper bracket, line it up with the axle, slide it over the rotor, and have one bolt ready to go so you can start it on, then you can let go, start in your other one. We're going to torque both of these to 181 foot-pounds. All right, now you want to take your pads and line them up with the bracket. They have these hooks top and bottom that need to slide over. You might need to pry up on these tabs. These are like little springs that hold the pad in and prevent it from moving around or rattling too much. There we go. Once you've pried these out, you should be able to slide the pad on smoothly. Perfect. Now take your caliper, slide it over the pads and the bracket. Have your 2 bolts ready to start in so that you can secure it. Bottom these out, snug them, and torque them to 24 foot-pounds. If your slider pin starts spinning, use some pliers and gently hold onto it. Just be careful not to damage the boot. Let's get the wheel on. Start on all 6 lug nuts. We'll bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then also in a cross pattern torque them to 150 foot-pounds. 150 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, here we go. Double check them if you'd like. And there you have it. Don't forget to pump up the brake pedal. Now let's top off the master cylinder, remove the cap, fill it up to the max line, and cap it back off. And take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.